This novel is a tragedy.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
It's a tragic world. It's like you feel bad. I mean, yes, it's a horrible society that treats women badly, but it's a society that's running towards its own destruction. And that's, as far as we can tell, this is the only society left on the planet. It's like, this is dark stuff. Welcome to the Skiffy and Fantasy Show's Mining the Genre Asteroid. Our podcast, I object to this word, our podcast evolution of Paul's long-running feature for our blog. It's not a reanimation, my feature never stops, Sean. This is episode number 2 of a show where older, overlooked genre gems are dug up and discussed anew.
We teach fem cubs to be quiet. It's a good first lesson in obedience.
Well, I'm Paul.
I'm Trish.
And on today's show, we'll be discussing 1974's Walk to the End of the World by Suzy McKee Charnas, the first book of the Whole Fast Chronicles. But before we get into that discussion, a reminder to our listeners. Please share your questions and comments with us about our show at skiffyandfantasy.com/listener suggestions. You also might suggest books you might actually suggest here. Your questions and comments can get discussed right here on future shows. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Sean's Alphabet streams every Friday at 6:30 p.m. Central, that's right now, to be part of our interactive live streaming format. Live and direct, Network 23. Finally, if you want to really show us love, and pre-orders of love, but also show us love, you can join our Patreon for as little as $1 a month and be part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord and make Sean happy. Don't you want to make Sean happy? I know you do.
It only takes $1 a month, and you get exclusive podcasts, torture cinema voting rights, and more by becoming a Patreon supporter. Of course, you can give more than $1 a month if you really love us, but even just a little bit helps. And we use all these glorious funds to help pay for hosting, cover website maintenance, and occasionally replace broken technology. This is a fan-run show. We have no paid producers or contributors. This is by fans and for fans.
Anyway, please tell folks about this show and what we're doing, because we crave on audiences. We need eyeballs. We need ears. We want people to engage with us. You can also review us on iTunes, Podchaser, Good Pods, all those places where you can review podcasts. Word of mouth is really what makes fan-run podcasts live or die, and we need your word of your mouth. Please help us find more ears for our sometimes very ridiculous show. This is one of the more serious shows. This is Mining the Genre Asteroid, but some of our shows are awfully ridiculous. That's the Skiffy and Fantasy brand. Help fuel that by telling other people about what we do. Anyway, Trish, could you please tell our fabulous listeners and watchers a quick summary of Suzy McKee Charnas' Walk to the End of the World?
Okay. This is a post-apocalyptic feminist dystopia, very angry radical feminist dystopia. We start out, there are 5 sections in the book. The first 3 sections are from the perspective of 3 main male characters. Yes, this is a feminist book, but it's seen from the male character's eyes for at least 3/5 of the book, and then we finally get the viewpoint perspective of one of the femmes. And at the end of the 5th section, we kind of hop around perspectives a lot. But to summarize, There's a man who's in charge of rovers, which are sort of like controlled berserkers in this holdfast society, which is very, very male-dominated. Women are basically slaves, and a lot of them don't talk or have their tongues cut out. A few of them talk, the social slaves who serve in individual households. Anyway, at the beginning of this book, Captain Kelms is told that he has to give up his troop of men and accompany an outlaw dark dreamer to find out what happened to shut down Endpath, which is a facility where old men go to die peacefully. He meets up with they eventually find Icar, the Icar Beck, who used to run that facility and has left, and the leaders of the Holdfast have decided to trade this guy, who turns out to be an acknowledged son, which is very heavily frowned on and taboo because, sons try to kill fathers. That's just the way of things. Try to kill them and replace them, and everybody knows that. And so, boys are raised in the boy house and don't know who their father, and of course not their mother is. It's sort of a Spartan setup. And anyway, this one boy was acknowledged by his son, and then that was kind of hushed up, and they were separated. Now, the idea for the council, the board of the Holdfast, is that they're going to trade him to the father, who now lives in a place called Troy, because they want to do some trading with Troy, and they figure, hey, this father's going to want to kill this son who is destined to try to kill him. Okay, so there's lots of going back and forth and looking for information and trying to track people down, and eventually they're in a community, they're in a slave encampment of women who have an elder who knows where somebody is, and as a parting gift, she gives them a young femme, Aldera, to serve as a kind of pack mule for them. And then we get to see a lot of stuff from her perspective. Eventually, they all make it to the city where Troy is. It turns out that the father actually sees famine coming, and he's planning to make power moves once that happens. And but he wants to make this son his heir instead of just killing him. But the youngster is so heavily programmed that despite whatever arguments, and some of them are not good arguments, that the father makes, he ends up killing the father anyway, and the town is destroyed, and people flee.
Including our heroine.
Including our heroine, who makes it out to the wilderness. She's going to look for the rumored free feminists, or free femmes that she has heard of, who allegedly live somewhere in the wilderness where the men haven't caught them. That is the very convoluted, world-heavy plot. It is absolutely true. Yeah. It takes a while to explain what's going on, because this book has a lot going on in it. I read this back in the 70s or 80s, and I basically just remember it as a very, very angry feminist diatribe. Now that I'm coming back to it after decades, I respect this book a lot more. I can see a lot more of the craft that goes into the world building and the characterizations. Men are not just evil. They're there are very strong social structures put into place to reinforce the hierarchies. And also, unfortunately, what seemed like just, wildly extreme ideas about how awful men might be. These days, with some of the extremists' positions that I've seen, the horrible things of Gamergate and incels and all of that, like the Screwfly solution, this book seems much more credible in its premises now than it did back in the 70s.
And that's kind of why I wanted to pick this book. I mean, in my name is genre Asteroid, for those who have not read my column or listened to our previous episode, I kind of want to pick works that have been... We're not going to be picking Ringworld or major Hugo winners that everybody has on their shelves. We're probably never going to do Dune, for example. But I wanted to pick books that are important and interesting and hopefully have something to say today rather than like, oh, that was an interesting book. And given the rise of a very strong anti-feminist movement in the United States, England, and elsewhere, I thought this book, which I had not read before, I've read other Suzy McKee Charnas, but I've not read this book before. I thought this book might be an interesting book to look at in the lens of 2024, and oh boy, was it. So I didn't quite know what to expect. Since you read it before, you kind of had an idea what to expect, but I went in blind, but that's often what happens with my genre Asteroid. I've kind of dove into a book I didn't quite know what I was going to get out of. I mean, I've read some of the feminist works of the 1970s, Joanna Russ, you mentioned James Jeffrey Jr. Ursula K. Le Guin isn't angry, but she definitely has a point of view. So I've read books like this. This is the angriest one I've read to date. I'd have to think about that. There might be angrier ones, but this one kind of like a swallowing a live coal is the metaphor I'm going to go with here, because it's like it burned all the way through my digestive system. It's like I mean, for the first half of the book, though, I was wondering, is this really a feminist book? Because Captain Kelms is we have a couple points of view, but Captain Kelms felt like our main character, like, okay, where's the women sort of thing? Or is that the point? I mean, until the femmes actually come on screen and our main character and our real main character comes in, I was thinking, like, what is this like one of those negative space sort of things where we're basically showing, because the lack of women and women being so objectified, it's done to a point. Like, is that the point of this book? And then, of course, I'm just going to put spoiler. I mean, we're going to spoil this book, so I'm sorry. I'm going to spoil it, listeners.
I already said the plot, basically.
Yeah,
so.
Captain Kelms comes to a sticky end. And it kind of comes a little out of the blue, because, he'd been built up as this main character for so long, and suddenly, whoops, oh, I guess that's no longer Captain Kelms' book. It's really her book in the end. So this is the kind of book, listeners, where it takes half the book to really actually meet the main character. So that's kind of what you're getting here. So the first half of the book is a lot of world building, which listeners and readers of my columns know. Like, I'm all about soaking up and trying to understand the world that book is trying to present. And this book kind of gives us a post-apocalyptic world, which is not very pleasant to live in. It is. You mentioned the Spartan society. I picked up on that too, because it's very male oriented. Men live together. It's even more. It's more extreme. I mean, it's like, let's dial things to 13 than Spartan society in the actual ancient world. It's like women are just there for breeding, and we don't even like to do that. There's more male sexual contact in this book than there's male female sexual contact, and that's kind of seen as kind of deviant. So, but our Captain Kelms, going back to Captain Kelms, himself is an atypical character. He's not the typical character. He's not the typical person of this society, because he should have long graduated from managing a gang to going to be an elder in the society. And he's stubbornly refused that all this time. He's not wanted to graduate his rank and role and become an elder. He likes doing what he does. And that's kind of, I think, the subtext is one of the reasons why he got thrown on this mission, because he's kind of an embarrassment that he's still, quote unquote, playing with boys, as it were. And so we get this buildup of the society. It's post-apocalyptic. We're kind of living in a not very agriculturally dense world. I mean, they're like basically getting this toxic seagrass and eating it as the main crop and main thing to eat. It's a very crapsack world. There's a lot of species died off in the apocalypse, and there's not a lot else left. And you mentioned the famine. Even that's kind of iffy. It's like, so this is a society that's being squeezed. So it's already extreme society. It's a society that's undergoing external pressures. That the screw is being tightened on it. And so we get to see a society that's kind of being pushed towards a precipice, and that's always interesting because it brings our characters into sharp relief. And I better stop talking for a moment and let you talk for a bit.
Yeah, just to go to the backstory a little bit. According to men, or the white men who are the rulers and masters.
White men, yes.
Long ago, the ancients were facing an uprising by women who had allied with the so-called dirties, i.e. not white people, and they were rebelling, and so the white men were forced to exterminate the non-white peoples and put women under extreme subjugation, and thus it has been since then. The social norms of the white men are reinforced through chants that boys learn, and also through directed drug-induced dreaming.
I definitely want to talk about that in more detail.
Yeah, conditioning. So there's a lot of that. We find out later that women relay their version of events in secret songs. A great deal of female communication comes through songs for those who are still able to talk. Many women, as I said, can't even talk anymore. They just obey commands. But a few can talk a little bit. Well, some can talk a little bit, and even if it's just "please you, master" is the standard phrase for, apologizing for something, or just any interaction with masters is "please you, master." It's we do find out later when we're finally meeting Aldera, the slave femme who accompanies the men on their mission, that there are female leaders called matres, which I assume is for matriarchs.
Matriarchs, yeah.
Right. And they have a plan. They are worried that lots of young femmes are becoming rebellious, and they're afraid that if the young femmes actually rebel, there will be a huge retribution by the men. And so they actually have devised a plan to send off Alinda with these people to be able to bring back a message, which will actually be a fake message from the wild femmes, which the matres don't believe exist, to placate the young rebellious femmes by making them think that help is coming, so don't rise up now. Yeah, it's convoluted.
It's very cynical.
It's convoluted and cynical. It's plays along with what Aldera has been angry about before, where the general advice from the beginning was for, okay, there's been this great cataclysm, we're all in trouble, the men have all gone crazy, but let's just be quiet and, let them have their way for now. Things will calm down and things will get better. But as we see by the state of society now, things did not get better. Women, were continually more oppressed. Their food rations were cut so that the women had to resort to milk farming of themselves and even cannibalism of their own dead. Very, very bad situation for women. Actually, I'll stop for the moment and let you react to some of that.
Yeah. It's like feels. I want to talk. This is based on a question we were thinking about the prose here, and the prose here is very. This is not, listeners and readers, the kind of book where the prose just melts and milks like butter. It can be very stilted, very angry, very jarring, very strident. I'll give you an example of the prose. The appropriate attitude of an older man towards a younger was wary concern, not lust. A man could hardly have a relationship of equals with one less mature than himself. Kelms had no intention of descending to the vice of boy stealing. Besides, after the years with Danzer, Kelms had formed the habit of avoiding close bonds with other men. It's I don't know if ponderous is the right word, but it's very overbearing. I'm trying to imagine listening to this as an audiobook and thinking, oh God, this would be like verbal assault on your ears. This is not something to lull you to sleep or something to listen to on an airplane to relax you. This is something that's bum, 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 bum. And it kind of goes in with, we talking about with the plot and the kind of how she set up the world. I mean, we have women having their own milk and eating their own dead. And there's a mention at one point that one city, apparently the boys apparently had gotten so upset at the femmes that they basically killed all of them, and they had no femmes left, and that was really bad. And they were afraid at one point that that's going to happen this time again. And even if femmes are lower class and ugly and they destroyed the world, you still kind of need them. It's like it's the post-apocalyptic radical feminist brutality of women. You can't live with them, can't live without them, and they're necessary evil in this world. I mean, this world doesn't have any real technological progress, but I'm sure if the men could figure out a way to clone themselves, now I'm thinking James Tiptree again. I'm sure they would, and just dispense with the ugly, dirty femmes who destroyed the old world. There's a lot of hatred in this book, readers, about from one side to the other. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the prose and how this book feels and felt as you were rereading it.
Well, it certainly comes off as old-fashioned prose. A lot of declamations in speeches. A lot of telling along with the showing. Although, these days we understand show not tell is not a universal good bit of advice. Bad, yes. But there's a whole lot of people ruminating about how things are, which probably most people wouldn't do that much thinking about how they were raised and how the philosophies of their societies. Now, several of the characters here are very thoughtful people and set up to be that way. So, there's justification for how much they're thinking about how things are, the way things are. But it is, I looked at this book and thought 215 pages. That'll be a quick read. I'll be fine. Readers, I was not fine. I was reading this book until about an hour before showtime, making notes, which slowed me down, of course. But there are many thoughtful passages, and although the writing can be a bit, it's not bad writing. There are some pretty passages. There are a lot of absolutely brutal passages. And I think the writing is effective in evoking emotions. And I think the emotions that McKee Charnas was aiming for. It's not a fun read. There is a lot that happens in it. There is definitely plot and a quest, like you mentioned. So, it's not all philosophy, but it's not an easy read, especially for a modern reader. But I absolutely think that it's a worthwhile read. There is so much world building just in simple throwaway paragraphs. As an example, he searched out the 4 stars that marked the cross sign and traced it on his own chest. It signified the opposed wills of father and son. Though the old religion was discredited, the sign had survived as a recognition and acceptance of its one great truth. So, wow, that paragraph is saying a lot. Christianity.
And you have to unpack it,
unpack it a little bit. Christianity's meaning with the cross has been entirely perverted from sacrifice to help others to just being an eternal struggle between the old and the young. Whether this was distorted by actual worshippers after the cataclysm, or by the later people's distorted memories of what Christianity was. It also makes me think of the Greek gods, where Zeus overthrew his father Cronus, who had castrated and overthrown his own father Uranus. Cycle of violence there. It's a horrible philosophy of, that they always, it is, it's not just that things turn out badly sometimes in families, it's that this is the natural order of things, that fathers and sons should hate and resent each other, and they'll lead to murder if not separated so that society can continue. So that's part of the philosophy behind the barracks, or maybe it's a justification that they came up with after the barracks were instituted. But the idea is that nobody should know who their fathers or their sons are.
Yeah, there's no indication that they knew about the ancient Greeks or Sparta. They kind of came up with this same solution that the Spartans did independently. They rediscovered the idea, if we just separate the boys from women and from fathers and from everybody else, and we just raise them communistically and communally and indoctrinate them, that will solve all problems, and we will have a perfect, happy society. Not so much. I get the sense that when things were better, because this is clearly a world on a downward slide. It's not it's a crapsack world to begin with, but it's a world that's, as I said before, where the screws are tightening, that the system kind of worked better. But I'm going to go back to Kelms, because I keep thinking about, I kept thinking about Kelms so much about this in this book, because he dominates the first half of the book for me, even more than our protagonist. And it's he's kind of like a symptom of the failings of the society, because I mean, if he was a good, happy, well-adjusted member of society, he would have become an elder long ago, and yet he still clings on to his current role. And I think that's a metaphor for the whole society kind of clinging on like a limpet to its ways and traditions, even as the world is changing around it. And they're not. And I mean, it's like the more they tighten things, the worse things get. It's like slipping through their fingers. It's like it's a matter of like it's a indictment of not willing to be able to change and face new truths and new societies and keep going. We have to do things the way we did the old ways. And if we go back to the 1950s and when men knew their place and everything would be fine. Okay, that's our society now, not them. But there's a sense of like, oh yes, we did things better in the past. If we just do those again, everything will be just, we will make this land great again.
Just do it harder this time.
Yeah, just do it harder and less compromising.
Yeah, one of the characters points out later that this barracks society and the setting of juniors against seniors is just how, it makes it easier for the seniors to control society. He doesn't mention, in the book does not mention the fact that breaking up families also makes it easier to control everyone because you're all raised exactly the same way, indoctrinated the same way, and not having a family to try to protect and help succeed. It's every man for himself. That makes it easier to just get people working, playing status games with each other, competing with each other, rather than really trying to build. And that makes it easier for the board and the seniors to control everyone.
The tragedy is that some people actually know what's happening and they just can't. It's kind of unable to stop. So I'm going to read this bit. Mm-hmm. It's not a political squabble between old men and young that we're faced with this time. It's going to be a great famine, a literal famine. Tell me, how do you think the seaweeds we lived on survived the wasting? I know that's the kind of question you're encouraged to think about in the boy house. Don't be embarrassed by your ignorance. The answer is the seaweeds were tough, fairly simple organisms that already were living on the rubbish of the ancient civilization to some degree. They were able to adapt to using the large quantities of poisons released during the wasting as a side effect of the men's efforts to defend their civilization. Our problem is the lamins and lavers have now metabolized and dissipated most of the contaminants left over from the wasting, and these seaweeds are finding much less of the kind of nourishment they've come to depend on. So it's like some people actually they can see the problem, but they're locked into this structure and these thought patterns and can't. And even if they try to change, outside forces are keeping them from actually making actual changes to actually survive, actually do anything. This novel is a tragedy.
Oh yes, absolutely.
It's a tragic world. It's like you feel bad. I mean, yes, it's a horrible society that treats women badly, but it's a society that's running towards its own destruction, and that's, as far as we can tell, this is the only society left on the planet. It's like, this is dark stuff.
You've referred several times to Aldera as the protagonist, and I'm not quite sure I'd agree with that. I think
challenge me.
McKee Charnas makes a very deliberate choice to start out with viewpoints from 3 different male characters before we hear from one of the femmes. And these people, none of them come off as evil. These 3 men, they are all doing the best they can, and actually every one of them is a bit of a free thinker and a bit of a quiet rebel, or a not so quiet rebel, in their society, and they aren't, none of them are overly concerned with the fate of women in this world, but they do see some of the flaws of their society, and some of them are quietly working against, to try and address those flaws. They are evil oppressors, and some of them are rapists, but they're not just evil people. They are entire whole persons who, are molded by their society to think the way they do and to treat women the way they do. And it makes me think of incels and other people who get into online, chat groups and get locked into a way of thinking. And, some of these are people who were raised by good and loving parents who just lost their kids to indoctrination by others. And, that certainly makes it, I don't excuse the rapes and the exploitation and the killings. But
the dehumanization of women. I mean,
the dehumanization of women. It's terrible. It's a terrible dystopia, but part of that dystopia is, these are well-rounded characters who are participating in the misogynistic exploitation of them. I read several reviews of this book also before the show, and someone named Bookgazing on Dreamwit says, she encourages readers to dismantle the argument that someone can't be misogynistic because they're nice in other ways. The two states can coexist, she says, and a man's misogyny, as well as his complicit involvement in a misogynistic society, must be acknowledged despite other characteristics that might allow him to present himself as a good man.
That makes me think of the movie Colossal. Have you seen the movie Colossal?
No.
The movie Colossal involves a female protagonist who, when she gets angry, basically controls a kaiju, and we have a male character who is a nice guy, but he's actually also a controlling jerk. And the movie's kind of pointing at the fact that yes, nice guys can also be misogynistic assholes. And I remember watching this movie. It was an uncomfortable thing to watch. This guy seems nice, but no, he actually is toxic to our protagonist, and that has bad consequences.
Right. Well, I think that's a very important point to make, considering how many men get passes for bad behavior because they are nice in other ways. Or because they have a bright future in front of them, or whatever, just completely disregarding how not bright the future of their victims may have become through their actions.
More dehumanization. Their lives are the only ones that count. Their victims do not count so much.
Right. But yeah, I think McKee Charnas, I don't actually know if it's just Charnas or McKee Charnas, but anyway, Suzy makes a very, very deliberate choice to start off her book with viewpoints from three men. Maybe that may have partly been affected by marketing. I don't know how many men would have picked this up, given the book jacket description. But, it may have been reassuring to some of them to start reading with
male protagonists,
sympathetic male characters to start with.
In the Spartan-like society, because there is still a lot of unnaturally unreasonable admiration for Sparta as a society, which is just insane. And this can be seen as an indictment, as no, Sparta wasn't a utopia, you idiots. It was a terrible brutalistic dystopia, and I will prove it to you by writing a post-apocalyptic futuristic one for you. I'm sure she read. I'm sure she read a lot of classical history and knew exactly what she was doing.
Right. So, but of course, even though you have the viewpoint male characters at the beginning, there is a whole lot of implication as they think about their society and the things that get mentioned and the things that don't get mentioned or dismissed. It's not like reading a book. Here's the men's viewpoint, and here's the women's viewpoint, because you were talking about, I think, negative space before. There is a whole lot of world building that she's doing, even through the men's viewpoint, that shows how bad and terrible things are. So it's not like men's utopia, yay, and then it gets flipped. And to the women's side, she's showing all along that it's bad. We just find out more about the badness and brutalism after we finally start hearing from Aldera.
So since it's a 70s book, there is drug use in this book, and I was not surprised that there was drug use, because this 1970s book, and listeners, lots of science fiction in the 1970s seem to be obsessed with drugs one way or the other. That was just, from the 60s into the 70s, that was just like, we're going to have strange and unusual drugs in our books. You have to deal with it. It was a very strange time, readers and listeners. So dark dreaming in this book is a method of social control and conformity, which is really interesting. I wanted your thoughts on it first before I talk.
Right. Well, the men are started on drugs and controlled dreaming as boys, and there are only certain dreams that they are allowed to have. I don't know how that happens exactly, but, they are directed during their dreaming, growing up as boys, to only dream about men fighting monsters, men killing their enemies, men being heroes, violent heroes. And that's the only kind of dreams that they are allowed to have. And the dark dreamer character encourages men to have uncontrolled dreams of whatever they choose to be. And there's a scene when he's doing this, and one man, through his body language, apparently is dreaming about being a woman. Another man dreams about being a beast instead of a man. And there are other, non-socially approved, non-conforming dreams that people are having, that the dark dreamer is saying, freedom to dream for yourself. And of course, the authorities don't like this and exile him.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that, like, using dreams and drugs as a way of social control and molding, and even as they try to do that, there are people like the Dark Dreamer who are actually trying to subvert that and actually use this power for their own ends. It's like, when you put power in the hands of a person, even if you have a chain, people are going to find their own uses for it. And I found it. There's not a lot of social outlets for they've got violence, they've got homosexual relations, and they have dreaming, and that's about it. It's not a fun place. It's like, where the healthy channeling of their, energy and urges is pretty limited, but, it's a post-apocalyptic world.
No, it's all channeled to serving the state. Really, that's about it.
No, and in chat, no alphabet stream. Sparta was not a fun place. I mean, for most people, unless you were a particular type, most of ancient Greece wasn't a fun place. Unless you were Socrates or Plato or something like that. Yes, I know. I'm sorry, I could not resist. It was a fun place, but for most people, it was not a fun place. And Sparta was not a fun place even for the Spartans. Because this novel kind of apes things in other ways. Because we talked about the barracks and boys being separated and women basically being just there for breeding. But this novel also goes into, frankly, eugenics, and Sparta itself was a eugenic society. The strong live and the weak die, and you get exposed on the hillside if you're not good. And this novel being post-apocalyptic, they have what are clearly mutants, and they clearly have them die. They don't even get the dignity of being turned into food. They just kill them. It takes the varnish off of any romanticism of what Sparta is. I mean, I know there's a forthcoming book from a Broken Step author who's now writing history about how Sparta was a terrible place. And I'm not going to read the book because the author is a Broken Step, and I'm not going to mention his name. But you could read this book, listeners, walk to the underworld and get the sense of just how terrible Sparta was and not have to deal with the Broken Step author's history book. So, it's like this novel, peels away those layers and shows you the ugliness underneath. And I value that. This is a book I'm not rushing to go back to read anytime soon. But it was a very powerful book to actually engage with. I think we might have a question or two running around here. So how do you think, Trish, this holds up against the other feminist works of the era? Russ, Sherry Tepper, James Tiptree Jr. How do you think this book holds up and fits in with that canon?
It absolutely holds up to the canon. It was written before some of the stuff that Russ and Tepper and Tiptree wrote. When I finished reading my copy today, I gave it 5 stars. For what it is doing, it is absolutely great. It is not a fun book to read, but, it is so well thought out, so well crafted, so many world-building details that tie together. It's not just a bunch of stuff thrown at a wall. It weaves together, how the social structures reinforce each other. I think it's really great. But I also think it's important to note that although it stands on its own, it is part of a quadrology. I have read the second book in the series, Motherlines, in which Aldera does make it out, and she does find women who live out there in the wilds. And there are different societies of free women who have different cultural traditions. Then there's book 3, The Furies. Aldera raises an army and goes back and conquers Holdfast. And in book 4, The Conqueror's Child, Aldera's daughter deals with more revolutions in society. So this book is basically just a dystopia. The second book presents a couple of feminist... Well, they're utopias to Aldera at first, but she comes to realize that they both have their flaws. And then book 4 just deals with, trying to build a functional society where nobody has to be a slave. This book came out in 1974. The second book came out in 1978. Then there was a gap of almost 20 years before books 3 and 4. But
that's a big change in society from 1978 to the 1990s.
Yes, and part of that is kind of meta in the fact that, these people, 20 years later, coming back, one of the reviews I wrote said that it was as though, someone from the 1970s was a raging feminist from the 1970s was resurrected in the late 90s and, came trying to rally the troops for war and, was confounded by the gains it had made, but also the new ways that sexism was propagated and reflected in society. That makes me think particularly of Sherry Tepper, who kind of got angrier, I think, in some ways as things went along. Because I read is it The Great Game or some Player of Game? I can't remember the name of the Tepper I read, which wasn't really that feminist at all. Player of Games is Ian Banks, I think. It's something of game, something, The Great Game, something. Anyway, sorry, listeners, I'm just coming this out of the top of my head. And then her stuff got, when you get to stuff by, The Gates of Women's Country or whatnot,
I mean, she got more strident as things went along, even as society itself changed. And it's like, it's interesting to see, and there's also a matter of trying to keep these authors from being erased, which is a continual problem in science fiction, particularly for women. Like if anything 20 years old no longer existed, like, oh no, women are, I mean, even like, it was like a couple months ago, it was like, women are writing fantasy now. It was like, what? Huh? When? What? Are you kidding? And we seem to have this conversation like every 8 years, like, women are writing fantasy now and it's great. It's like, yeah, I've seen the last several iterations of that. Thank you very much. So I do think this does. I have not read any of the novels in this series. I don't know if I will get to them at some point. There's way too many books to read in too little time sometimes. But you know, this is certainly the sharpest of, you know, the Russ and Tepper and Tiptree and the stuff that I have read. This book is raw, I would say. I'm going to use a food metaphor. I'm not hungry. I had just a dinner, so it's kind of like a steak. It's kind of like a steak that, I don't like steak, listeners, so bear with me on my metaphor here. It's kind of just been blued, and that's it. It's kind of raw and bloody, and it's very steaky. And if you don't like that, you might not want to read this book. It's a book that demands your attention, and you can't, as I said before, you can't just go like la la la, listen to this audiobook, la 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 la. It's a book that is hits you in the gut again and again with its world building and with its characters who are, as you said, Trish, a couple of times, immersed in this world and part of this world and react very holistically with the world. It's like you believe these characters and what they do. They're completely and fully a part of the matrix of what Charnas has built up to their introduction and where they go from there. So it's not like because you know there are books which are very, very didactic, where you have a character just making mouth-piecing speeches and it's like sits in the matrix and it doesn't feel good. Whereas these characters are passionate and powerful and make points, but it fits in the world and what they do. I mean, we talked about the declamatory style of the book, but this is a society that feels declamatory. It's a declamatory society. Bombastic. I mean,
yes.
It's this is the way society works and how people are raised and how they act. It's not, so it feels really strong and readable.
Well, let me proffer a counter food metaphor. To me, this book is more like ceviche, which is when you take seafood and soak it in marinade. You don't cook it at all, but you soak it in a strong marinade for so long, and such a strong marinade that it becomes sort of chemically cooked and safe to eat. And to me, you know, this whole book is steeped in bitterness and anger, but it's not just raw meat. It is thoroughly considered and complex and, you know, some people don't like ceviche, but
ceviche scallops are pretty tasty, in my opinion.
It can be very rewarding, despite, you know, its otherness from a lot of American cuisine. It's really,
cooking
really
things
good.
Without fire is almost anathema to Americans. Like, the bigger the fire, the better. And the book I was thinking of is the True Game series by Sherry S. Tepper in the early 80s. That's what I was thinking of. Which reminds me of other books entirely other than this one. It actually feels very, very different. But after that, I mean, the books that Tepper went into are, I'm reacting to Sean's point in the chat. Yeah, kind of went more along the lines of the more feminist stuff after that, when she starts to talk about the Arbai trilogy and Plague of Angels and that. So she kind of got more feminist
I will say
as time went on rather than less.
This does feel very much of its time. It very much feels like a 1970s book. But at the same time, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's very interesting to look at, on its own terms as a work of fiction, but also as a depiction of a state and time in the genre.
Another thing I was thinking of when I was reading this book, because I always think of role-playing games, it's like, what role-playing games would this fit into? And I had to think of, well, let's see, you have a oppressive society, things aren't great, you have characters under stress and acting with and against each other. Clearly, if you're going to have a role-playing game set in this world, you clearly got to run Apocalypse World. And it kind of works. It's like we have hard holds instead of hold fast, and we have Combs as kind of this gang leader, and so characters can be slotted into a very confrontational sort of society and system, kind of like put on each other, because this book runs on conflicts that are manufactured or attempted to be manufactured, even if father does try to make this like, father, we could rule the whole fast as father and son. I kept thinking of Star Wars at some point in this book.
Right. I was also thinking, I haven't played Warhammer 40K, but from some things I've listened to me, that sense of very, very strict, rigid roles that people are expected to conform to, and if you're not one of the faithful, you're just evil. I'm sure David Annandale could tell us a lot more about that, but from what I've heard, it reminded me a bit of that. And in the stream, of course, Sean is telling us riffs.
Yes, Sean loves riffs more than life itself.
But I've never played it, and I don't know anything about it, so I can't really comment.
The answer is no, Trish. No, you don't want to run riffs. You don't want to run riffs general or riffs for this book. Sorry, Sean. It is not. Sure. No, there are other games. There are other games to play, and there will be streaming. But that's a different interest of mine, other than mining the genre Asteroid. So do we have any? I need to look at this. The script of ours.
Sean, you can tell me more about the game later, and I will consider playing riffs. I will not make a commitment at this time.
I think since we're over an hour at this point, we probably should move towards final thoughts. We don't grade mining the genre, so
have we really been talking?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Wow.
There's a lot to say about this book.
Okay.
So it's a powerful book. It's a book that demands attention. It's a book that really runs on its world building. And even once I figured out, and I even had I had the Kindle, it's ancient Sparta. Then even if we can figure that out, there's still nuances and interesting ideas, and laying that society bare in a way that, I mean, as I said before, ancient Sparta gets romanticized way too much for my own taste. And this book demythologizes ancient Sparta by showing how crapsack a world would be if it ran on ancient Spartan lines. Here's your ancient Sparta. Enjoy. No, don't enjoy. It's a society where where oppression and conformity and trying to break free of those is kind of ruthlessly dealt with, no matter whether you're a boy, a man, or a femme. So it's a society that I enjoyed my visit to the Holdfast, but I don't want to buy any property there, if you understand my metaphor. there are fantasy worlds where I would love to just like set up a house. This is not, or science fiction place where I like set up a space station. This is not a place I want to put a pied à terre. I don't
want to even visit it. No, thank you.
Well, you did visit it, is my point. But you don't want to.
Well,
yeah,
okay.
But
yes.
I'm not eager to go skipping back to it anytime soon. But I do think it's an important book, and if you want to understand feminism today through a lens of the 1970s and see just how terrible patriarchy can be when gone absolutely toxic, which parts of our society want to make it so. Thank you, abortion rights. This is the kind of society you get when you have patriarchy that goes completely toxic, and that's an important lesson. What did you think?
Yeah, and so I guess that's pretty much your final
thoughts.
That's my final thoughts. Right, yeah. Yeah, this book is definitely a cautionary tale for women that placating men is not going to make them eventually turn nice to you. The trend in this book is they killed off all the not white men, and they had nothing left to be their slaves except for the women, and they put them under the boot good and hard and kept them there, and even though they had no power left, continued to blame them for everything that went wrong, from famine to social unrest, to anything at all. I think it's an important story. I think it's well worth reading. And I'm very glad that I revisited it with a 21st century eye.
Thank you for joining me here tonight and discussing this book. I mean, I do enjoy, and listeners, yes, I have. There's the Mining the Asteroid column never went away. Just went off to other things for a while, and there's always going to be more. But I enjoy being able to talk to somebody about a book because you see insights and get reactions in a way that me writing about it. It's a different form. It's a different way of bringing these books to you, and I hope you listeners, if you're interested in this sort of feminist sort of writing, that you'll pick up this book. If we've interested in you, or hopefully maybe just enjoyed us talking about it and bringing up these ideas. Either which way, look forward to more discussions. Mining that Charnas asteroid. That asteroid is inexhaustible, and we'll find another seam of stuff to talk about for the next book.
Yep, Sean in chat is asking if he can pick the next Mining the Genre Asteroid. I think that would be fair, but also we are always looking for listener suggestions. So if you would like to help us figure out what to read, please, you can type suggestions into the chat right now, or if you're listening to this later, you can send them to us in a variety of media, which we'll get to in a minute.
Right. So that's it, folks. If you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, you can go to skiffyandfanty.com/listener-suggestions, or send us an email, skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. You can also talk to us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, we're on Threads, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're else and everywhere. We're not quite as ubiquitous as Paul, but nobody's as ubiquitous as me. All our links, including our newsletter and Patreon, can be found in our link tree, which is linktr.ee/Skiffy and Fanty. And once again, if you like what we do, please support us at patreon.com/Skiffy and Fanty and give us some love by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. And he's not here, but if you like what Sean does, he streams gaming on Twitch Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So it's on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. He also does Geek Chat. He did Geek Chat yesterday with Arturo Serrano. He'll sometimes get me to go play games with them or just pick my brain on science fiction. So that's on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. We can come join us and have some fun. Where could they find you, Trish?
You can find me on Blue Sky at P.E. Matson, on Mastodon at newsy.social@trishiem, or on my blog at whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com. And I also, of course, write reviews and podcast at Skiffy
You
and
also
Fanty.
podcast elsewhere too, don't you?
Yeah, and other places too.
Don't put yourself under a bushel. From Nepal to New Zealand and beyond, I can eligible be found across the internet as Prince Justin with a V, PRINCEJVSTIN. Book reviews, podcasting, streaming, sharing photography. Throw a rock on the internet, you can find me for better or for worse. So I guess
He has never yet been found in Tibet, but
you never
know.
you never know, listeners. If I go to Tibet, you'll know about it for sure. I guess it.
Well, Sean isn't here to make it awkward, so I'll just say, listeners, take care of yourselves and each other.
Good night, listeners, and thank you for joining us. Take care. Be well. Good night.
Good night, all.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.